Aloha, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Hawaii Department of Transportation's 2023 Protect Our Water Conference. So my name is Doug Williams. I'll be the moderator for this. And their session is titled Hawaii Department of Transportation Highways Stormwater Post-Construction BMP Manual Updates. So it should be very riveting and exciting information. I'm looking forward to it myself. So this is not only in person, but it's also being streamed online. So to our virtual participants, welcome. And we will have some time at the end for questions and answers, or hopefully answers to the questions. But if you have questions, save them till the end. Online, so virtual attendees, please enter them in the chat, I think, right? There's a Q&A section, I think, somewhere. The chat, we'll get it. Anyway, so Vijaya is a senior project manager at Enviro Services and Training Center. She has a lot of experience, so over 18 years of experience with stormwater and water resources projects. So lot of experience in everything we're learning about today. Her expertise is centered around construction BMPs, or best management practices, and design, inspection, as well as maintenance. She manages design projects that address erosion control and storm drain improvements with a specific emphasis on low impact development. So her work experience includes providing technical and programmatic assistance to the Hawaii Department of Transportation Highways Division, DOT Airports Division, County of Maui, Washington State DOT, Maryland State Highways Administration, and the Hawaii Army National Guard. I think I caught all that. Is there any more? It's a long list. That's really impressive. And so next we have Jason Lau. He's a principal at the Limtiaco Consulting Group. He's been there a while, so over 24 years. Been there a while. Lots of experience. Includes civil site design, sewer, water, drainage systems, as well as temporary and permanent BMPs, which is important for what we're all here doing. He's also a licensed professional civil engineer in Hawaii and California, and a certified professional in erosion and sediment control. So please help me in welcoming both Vijaya and Jason, and good morning to you guys.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks everyone for allowing us to present here today. So Vijaya and I are going to talk about the DOT Stormwater Post-Construction BMP Manual. And we've done a few presentations on this within the last year, so we're going to focus mainly on the key takeaways, the differences between this current manual and the previous one. And then we'll also give a preview of some of the changes, some of the tweaks that we expect to have within the early next year. What's on the left is the previous manual. This one was drafted in 2015. The one on the right is the current manual. And this one came out in 2022. And so for all new projects that are currently designed on or after July 1st, 2022, need to comply with the new manual. So there are a few projects that are still being designed based on the old manual, but that's because they were submitted prior to that date. For those of you who still have not downloaded a copy, if you go to stormwaterhawaii.com, they'll take you to the DOT Oahu District's website. And there's actually two locations where you can download it from this site. So I'll show you where the better location is. So if you go on top along the middle, there's a designer and contractor link. And if you scroll down, you come to this section. And this is where you want to go. So there's links to the manual itself. And there's also links to take you directly to the post-construction BMP checklist. And also if you want to download the alternative compliance spreadsheet. There's also links to previous workshops and presentations, and you can also download the 2015 version if you wanted to look at that for reference. And Vijaya is going to show you some links for the Maui District website as well. Okay, so this is the journey. So Whenever we do an update to the manual, we try to improve upon the previous version. But the goal has always been the same, which is to improve stormwater quality, protect our water. And so today's presentation is mainly a refresher. We want to focus on, some of the key changes. Some of the first one is the MS4 versus non-MS4. We have different criteria for both. And so Oahu and Maui both have their own separate MS4 permit for urbanized areas. For Maui, the MS4 permit does cover the areas for Kahului and Paia, but to keep it simple, the entire island of Maui follows the same criteria. The non-MS4 permit areas covers the remainder of the islands, so Hawaii, Kauai, Molokai, and Lanai. And so this is important because there are different criteria. For MS4 permit areas, post-construction BMPs are required for projects that result in 1 acre or more of disturbed area. And for non-MS4 permit areas, it's for public projects that result in 1 acre or more of new impervious area. So the previous manual was consistent in that all locations were based on impervious area, but what DOT wanted to do was they wanted to be more aggressive in the amount of post-construction BMPs constructed. So we adjusted the criteria for MS4 permit areas, and that kind of opened it up. So more projects are now open to possibly require post-construction BMPs. And so because of that change, it's important to know, how is disturbance defined, right? So if you're familiar with Department of Health and PDS permits for construction activity, the definition is similar in that disturbance includes any construction activity that results in soil penetration. If you're working on paved surfaces, anything that exposes underlying base course. But the main difference is that for the post-construction BMP manual, disturbance excludes activities that leaves the soil intact, such as existing paved areas. It does not include staging and storage areas. And the main reason for that is because the DOH NPDES permit focuses mainly on construction activity. So anytime you're driving on a paved surface, you may kick up dust or have oils that leak out from vehicles. But for the post-construction BMP manual, we're focusing on development and the permanent condition. Some of the questions that DOT has gotten within the last year, is how is disturbance defined for large projects? Say if you have a large subdivision or a big box retailer. So a lot of times it's in private property, but it does extend within DOT right-of-way, either for frontage improvements, access lanes into the property. So the disturbance area is for the total project area and not just the area within DOT right-of-way. For phased projects, it depends on the timing of the project, but also take into consideration the type of pollutants anticipated, the type of activity. If your project has multiple phases that are going to be consecutive, it may make sense from a cost effectiveness standpoint to do all the post-construction BMPs in the beginning. But if your phases are spread out over a few years, it may make sense to, wait until the phase 2 comes along. So the main intent is that you comply with the post-construction BMP manual, and it's left up to the discretion of DOT. Okay, some of the new terms that have been introduced into the new manual. We have this concept for public and private projects. Public projects are basically anything funded by DOT highways. It's either designed in-house or by an engineering consultant and then constructed by DOT highways or a private contractor. These projects are located within DOT highways or a parcel owned by DOT highways. And then a private construction project is basically anything else. So it's not specifically funded privately, but also could be a city and county project or another project by a public agency. And then these projects are, partially within or adjacent to DOT highways or drains to the DOT highways right of way. So there's different criteria for public as well as private projects. We also have these concepts for new development and redevelopment. And these were in the previous manual, but we did tweak it a little bit. For new development, we're focusing once again on new impervious surfaces, but we have this that we added. It's intended for vehicular use. And this is based on studies that have been done across the country that find that the majority of pollutants are caused by, either oils and grease or metals from vehicles, from cars and trucks. So that's what we want to focus on. So it excludes impervious surfaces for, bikes, sidewalks, and shared use paths. For redevelopment, this is construction and reconstruction on existing paved surfaces. And this excludes pavement preservation, such as these treatments that are shown on the screen. And this is the only formula I'm going to have in my, unlike Doug is way smarter than I am. So he had tons of equations shown. But the amount of treatment that's required is based on basically 3 components. So first component is the new development, which is basically your impervious surfaces. Your second component is your redevelopment. And what I want to focus on is that you're not required to treat the entire area for redevelopment. So for MS4 permit areas, you're required to treat 25%. And that is because, if you have an existing pavement and you're doing reconstruction, the impact is not as great as if you had a grassy field and you're building a new road. So the impact is not as great, so we allow for that reduction. The last component allows for a credit for existing treatment. Just note that this is not automatic. So you do need to negotiate with DOT because there's a lot of factors involved, such as what type of treatment is there, whether that existing device has been maintained properly and how effective it is. So that is a credit that's on the table, but that needs to be worked out with DOT with their approval. And what type of treatment is required? So the progression that the designer needs to follow. So LID needs to be priority, and that's mainly with infiltration and any method to try and match the pre-development hydrology. We don't want to increase flows downstream. If that is not feasible, the next step is to look at traditional non-LID, which is typically filtration, sedimentation. And only if those 2 are not feasible, then you can look at proprietary devices such as your hydrodynamic separators, baffle boxes. So a lot of times, like Doug mentioned, the DOT right-of-way is very limited, so there's space constraints, and that's where low-impact development may be difficult to achieve. The current manual has introduced a new system for tracking. So if your project does treat more than what is required, it'll generate a credit. If your project is less than what's required, it'll generate a debit. And what this does is allows DOT to basically track compliance. So at the end of the year, they can take a look at all the projects that came through, and they know exactly how far they're either above or below. Definitely you want to have a credit. If you are falling short of your required treatment area, they do allow for alternative compliance. So this is also new to this current manual. So just be aware that the BMP manual is a guideline only. So if you do your calculations and you're short of treatment, make sure you can look at different types of treatment, different devices, change your approach. Just because it's not in the manual doesn't mean that it's not allowed. You're allowed to use your expertise and you can suggest something else for DOT approval. If DOT does approve it and they agree that, all options have been looked at, they do allow for this alternative compliance, which is going to be addressed in a future project in a different watershed with an equal or higher priority. This alternative compliance is allowed for public construction projects only. Okay, and so within the last year, probably the most questions that DOT has is basically how to fill out this checklist. So just to clarify, so all projects that are submitted for DOT review need to submit a checklist, regardless if it's a public or private project, regardless if it's a MS4 or non-MS4 permit project. And just make sure that you submit the correct checklist because each one is different depending on the criteria. The yellow is something that we've added since the manual first came out, and it's to address the question that we had about disturbance and impervious areas. The question was, how do you calculate it? So we added a note just saying that the entire project area needs to be considered and not just a portion within state right-of-way. And we also have a lot of questions on section 1, which is basically, is your project exempt from post-construction BMPs? So only fill in these boxes if your project only consists of these activities. So for example, in the middle of your screen, item C3, installation or replacement of pavement striping and pavement markers. So if you have a new road, brand new road with pavement striping, you would not check this box, right? So only if you have an existing road that you're not introducing any new impervious surfaces, if you're just replacing the pavement striping, then that's where you would check this box. And so we're trying to make this a lot more streamlined. So we've added the other items in yellow. So if your project disturbance is less than an acre, your project is exempt. If your project does not discharge into DOT MS4, you're exempt. So any exemptions you're allowed to skip over and go to the end of the checklist, right? If not, if you are doing work that is not exempt, you have to continue on to step 2. And as a designer, make sure you read the steps. We tried to make it clear as possible, and at the end of each statement, we direct you which number to go to. So some consultants have been checking, every single one. But if you follow it, you may be allowed to skip ahead where indicated. And then the last change that we made to the checklist, we also have the alternative compliance spreadsheet, and we wanted to kind of tie them together. So we've added this link. So as you finish your checklist, you can click on the link that should pop up your compliance tracking spreadsheet. And Vijaya is going to go over that as well.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Doug, for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I am going to be presenting the Stormwater Post-Construction Risk Management Practice Manual updates from HDOT Highway Maui District's perspective. So similar to Oahu, Maui District has their own web page, which is stormwatermaui.com. And similar to Oahu, we have a resources page that will take you to all the resources that we have. If you go under the resources for designers and contractors, you will get all the resources, the construction BMP field manual, post-construction BMP manual, and all that information. If you scroll down on that resources for designers and contractors page, on the very bottom, you will see, very similar to Oahu, we have listed the post-construction BMP requirements, because these are the questions that we've been getting. Okay, my project started in 2014, which checklist do I submit? Or my project started in 2022, which checklist do I submit? So we've clarified here, gave you both the manuals 2022 and 2015, and all the checklists are provided there as well. So it's very similar to Oahu's, and it's just another way for Maui designers to go find that data. In terms of implementation, HDOT Highways Maui District has reviewed 74 projects since the 2022 manual became effective on July 1st, 2022. Of these, 30 projects were public projects and 44 are private projects. In the universe of 74, we had a total of 35 permit projects. And I'm talking about permit projects because our review process is primarily triggered through the permits. It's when people come into permits for permit to perform work or permit to get a connection or a discharge permit. So that triggers most of our plan reviews. And so we had 17 public permit project reviews and 18 private permit project reviews since July 1st, 2022. That's about 47% of the universe. So of the 74 plan reviews we did, 58 projects were exempted from post-construction BMP requirements. And I'll talk about that in a second. And even though they were exempt, one of the projects actually implemented an LID, post-construction BMP. And I'll also share that in a minute. And then the remaining projects, 16, are currently under review. Of these, there are, interestingly, I did some data analysis to get all this data, obviously, right? So, and then we found that 2 private projects right now with access connections are, that require PCBMPs are asking for a variance. And it's under review, it's not been approved, so that's ongoing. And the reason for all these exemptions for the 58 projects are because primarily we receive a lot of permit projects. We really don't have big roadway redesigning or new roadway construction projects going on Maui, and nothing since July 1st, 2022. So that's why most of our projects fall under the universe of exemptions. And so most of our permit projects that came in are test pits, utility installation, relocation primarily related to sewer water laterals, telephone poles, and electrical poles. And then we had some access connections, driveway, repaving, and things like that. And then private projects that came into us did not either discharge into state MS4 or they did not disturb more than an acre, and therefore they got an exemption. And most of the public projects that we implemented since July 1st, 2022 they're all maintenance or emergency repairs. So the maintenance included some resurfacing, shoulder repair, sidewalk gap repair, guardrail repair. And then the emergency repairs were some bridge localized abutment repair. And so they did not trigger any of the requirements. However, HDOT has been Maui District has been proactively working on some LID projects that I'm going to share in the next few slides. So HDOT Highways Maui District is working on 2 LID PCBMB projects right now. The first one is the Kahumanu Avenue Drainage Improvement System project, which basically is addressing erosion at Maui Police Department. And then the second one is the Stable Road PCBMB project that is addressing erosion at the intersection of Hana Highway and Stable Road. So our first project, erosion at the Maui Police Department, here are some pictures. You can see it's clearly eroding and entering the storm drain system. This is behind the Maui Police Department parking lot, fronting Kahumanu Avenue. So we designed a project to include a couple of bioretention basins and a grass well. And this is the scope of work. We are installing some temporary irrigation, soil amendments, and landscaping to support the bioretention basins and grass well. Here's a plan view showing both the bioretention basins and the grass well. Here's the bioretention basin 1, so you can look at it closer. And here's the landscaping plan. The design for landscaping includes peely grass, pohinahina, and Bermuda. We are also installing a couple of trees as a part of this project. So we, in conjunction with the maintenance, we decided that code trees would be better for future maintenance. So that's what they chose. And we are installing a couple of those under this project. Here's the plan view showing basin 2 and the grass well. This is the landscaping plan for the same, pretty much using the same landscaping for basin 2 and the grass well as well. Here are some typical details. On the left, you're going to see the typical civil detail for bioretention basin, and on the right, it's the landscaping detail. In terms of the status of the project, we had a pre-bid meeting on November 2nd. The deadline to request to submit RFI questions and substitution requests was 2 p.m. yesterday, and the deadline to submit bids is November 27th. So hope some of you will actually bid on this. Moving on to our second project, this was the project that I was talking about, erosion at the intersection of Stable Road and Hana Highway. So this is what it looks. It was primarily being used as staging and or parking area. And so this project interestingly came to HDOT Highways Maui District as a public complaint. Even though we addressed the aspects of public complaint that came in, then we looked at it, they decided that they want to do more. So they decided to implement a permanent erosion control measure at this site. So here you're looking at the drainage area of the site. There's really no existing storm drain system either along Hana Highway and or Stable Road, which are basically in the DOT's right of way. And the drainage basin you're looking at the top of the screen above the bike path is basically a private owned for that subdivision and is maintained by the HOA. So we are looking to install again, either bioretention or bioswales at this location. The area has a couple challenges with presence of utilities and providing access to MECO and other utility companies. So this is our preliminary layout that we came up with. We're still working on the design. And this project, the design is slated to be completed in April 2023, or 2024, sorry. and then taking on Jason. So that was all about our projects. And then we are now moving on to the updates to the manual. And as Jason mentioned, he showed you guys the updates to the checklist, which then linked to the PCBMP compliance tracking spreadsheet, which previously was known as the alternative compliance tracking spreadsheet. And we realized that the naming convention is kind of confusing because it leads you to believe that it's only required for alternative compliance, and the manual doesn't really say when you need to submit it. So that's why we've taken a good look at it, and we are we changed the name to PCBMP compliance tracking spreadsheet, and we're also made some changes to the spreadsheet itself. Oh, and then currently this alternative compliance spreadsheet is only being used by DOT to track their project reviews. And so I do not believe any of the designers are actually using it. So in order to make it more usable for both designers and DOT, we made a decision to split it into two separate files, one for designer and the other for DOT. So the designer spreadsheet will focus on just the design elements, help you track the calculations, and provide DOT an overview so they can figure out whether you're having a deficit or if you're having a credit or a deficit. And that was the main intent. We added a guidance tab to both the spreadsheets to make it more user-friendly. And then Maui also added Maui watersheds so that the designers can select the Maui watersheds. Because this spreadsheet, again, will be used only for MS4 permit areas that Jason was talking about, which are essentially the islands of Oahu and Maui. So this is the draft that we currently have for the PCBMP compliance tracking sheet for the highways. So on the left, you'll see the guidance tab, and on the right, it's basically the tracking for all the reviews that are happening. I'm really not going to talk a lot about this because this is intended for DOT and not really for designers or contractors. This is the PCBMP compliance tracking sheet for the designers. It requires designers to, the intent for this was to require designers to submit this tracking sheet. So because right now DOT is taking that information from whatever design documents you're submitting and inputting into their spreadsheet for compliance review and tracking. So we wanted the designer, if the designer could assist DOT and provide all the calculations, it would be easier for both parties and make it easier for the review process as well. And then we are also going to make this a requirement for all projects, and that includes exempt projects as well. So I'm going to talk about the compliance tracking sheet for designers. Please bear with me because I had a brilliant idea of using the Excel. I came up with a made up example on how to find your watershed, how to enter the design data and use in Excel. So we're going to try and use the Excel and then try and show you how to enter the data. It's just a preview. If you have any questions when this rolls out, you can always reach out to DOT or to us. So while he pulls up the Excel, okay. So right now, I have a magical Excel that you can't see.
You want to see it?
Yeah, can you show them once? And then pull it back. So that's the Excel. The idea was that I was going to show you how to scroll through the Excel. What are they seeing? I'm not able to see. So you're in the guidance tab right now, but I will go over. It's pretty much self-explanatory. So it has, the top portion has the intent of why we created the spreadsheet. Then it has some resources for the websites and where do you get additional information. And on the bottom, all the yellow cells are the user entered cells, and all the other color is basically pre-calculated. So when we actually roll this out, it's going to be all locked. So you'll only be able to enter in data into only the user fields, which are the yellow cells. I apologize for the snafu. So one of the things that I wanted to show you was I made up a project where I was going to talk about what happens if you have two different watersheds, and then where do you find the information for the watersheds. So the link for you to know which watershed you are is will be provided in the guidance sheet under the watershed user information. So if you click on the link, it'll take you and it will show you your project area. Right now, the project that I made up for this presentation is on Maui, of course, right? I'm representing Maui. So it's a roadway widening project, magical project that we made up on Hana Highway from Kahumanu to Haleakala Avenue. And then it's spanning basically two watersheds. It's Kalialinui and Iya watersheds. And we are proposing to add 3 acres of new impervious in Kalialinui watershed and 2 acres of new impervious in Iao. And then we are gonna install an enhanced well treating 1/2 acre in Kalialinui watershed and install a series of bioretentions because there's plenty of median space on Hana Highway in Iao watershed. So we're gonna treat 5 acres using those. So that was the example that I was gonna show you. I'm actually gonna type it in and I'll show you. The other thing I wanted to mention is each project, like Jason mentioned, has a priority. Each watershed has a priority, I'm sorry. And the watershed priorities are based off of the DOH's 2022 water quality data for the 303D watersheds and the TMDL watersheds. And so the ranking goes from 0 to 4, 0 being the least ranking and the 4 being the highest ranking. Thank you. You can't really see it, but I'm typing the watershed names. Yeah, I'm gonna. So I typed in Kalialinui and it automatically showed that the priority of the watershed is 0. So you will not be, you wouldn't need to do anything if and whenever DOH will update their 2022 data, which typically happens every 2 years. In 2024, we'll probably roll out another spreadsheet at that time. When I type EL, EL has a higher priority, 1. I'm actually typing in the numbers that you can't see, but I'll show it to you in a second. In the meantime, Jason, do you have anything to share?
Does anyone have questions in the meantime? We can answer some questions.
Yeah, if you could raise your hand, I'll bring over the mic here. And for our virtual guests, please go ahead and enter in your questions in the chat and we'll go from there.
Good morning. I have 2 questions. The first question is in terms of an alternative watershed compliance, what are the criteria that are considered to determine whether or not a project in an alternative watershed will be accepted?
So that's going to be left up to DOT to decide. And so every watershed has a priority that's assigned to it. So based on TMDL's waste flow allocations. So as long as your alternative watershed is equal or higher priority, then DOT may choose to, plan for a future project within that watershed. So it just allows for different options so that in case there's space constraints or, groundwater, then they do have options to locate a new project. So it's kind of, The theory behind it is like you're looking at the island as a whole. So if you have a deficit in one watershed, you can pick it up in another one and then you kind of balance it out.
Is it within a single island,
Is per island.
per island?
Yeah, so you can't transfer it to a different island. It's within the same island.
Okay, so how do you address environmental justice issues then? So say, for example, there's areas that in the urban corridor are very constricted, and someone were to propose a project in another watershed, and it happens to be in a demographic area that is disadvantaged, either economically or socially or so forth. How is that factored into the decision making?
So that all needs to go into DOT's decision on which watershed. So it's similar to if you had, I guess, just like a new project, right? They'd have to get public buy-in and get outreach. So just because you have an additional or a different watershed identified, they still need to go through the process and then do their due diligence and see whether it makes sense, if there's additional permits required. So this is just one option that needs to be looked at, alternative compliance. We still need to look at all of the other factors that go into like a typical project.
And one of the primary reasons I think we develop water alternative compliance is to enable DOT to track the credit, right? Like if they do projects and they want to keep that credit for future, they could, or if there is a deficit where they're unable to do projects, then it also forces them to implement PCBMP somewhere. So the idea was, okay, you're not just taking a negative credit, you're trying to improve water quality in a different watershed, even though it may not be the same, or it's better than doing nothing and just getting a negative credit. And also remember that the alternative compliance only works for MS4 permit areas, so that's only Oahu and Maui, and it only works for public projects. So at this time, DOT is not looking at giving alternative compliance credits to private. The private projects would have to meet all the criteria that DOT has, and additionally meet all the criteria that whichever county requirements they're in. So for example, if it's a project on Maui, they would have to meet all of County of Maui requirements and DOT requirements. And there will be instances where they might request a variance, and that will be reviewed and approved on a case-by-case basis.
Any other questions? No? How about online? Any online questions? No? All right. Did you want to share anything else, Vijaya?
Yeah, so apparently in my spreadsheet now magically is working and you're able to see it while I'm typing. Yay. So here's the data entry. This is, of course, a made-up project. And the reason why we're sharing this is to show you, like, all projects are not going to be within one watershed, right? Like, it'll span multiple watersheds. So this is just to show you how to enter the data and to only cover or credit whatever you're doing within that watershed. So to appropriately track whatever you're doing within that same watershed. So in this example, we are using Kalialinui, which is a priority 0. We're adding more impervious, but we're not able to treat much just because of the area, and there's not a lot of median in that watershed. And so we're only able to treat half an acre at the end. So then we end up with a deficit of 2.63 acres. But in EAO, which is a higher priority watershed, there's a lot of room in the median to install bioretention. So we've installed more than needed. And therefore we got that was supposed to be 5 acres, sorry. So we installed multiple bioretentions in the median, and we're able to treat 5 acres. So then you have a credit. So you're treating more than you're required to. So overall, if you look at the top orange box, you're going to see that the required treatment was 5 acres total. And then the net credit is 0.3 acres. And then in this example, because you provided additional treatment in a higher priority watershed, which is EL, this would be acceptable for DOT if you submitted this level. But if you switch the priorities and you were treating more in Kalyan Nui, but you end up getting a deficit in EL, I am not sure how DOT would look at that. That would have to be that. I don't think DOT would approve that. So that was the example that we were trying to show you. That's it. Any questions?
Final chance. Any good questions? No? All right, well, thank you very much, Vijaya and Jason. Great presentation, really appreciate it. So please give them a round of applause. All right, so after this, I left my script over there, but there's going to be a 15-minute break and then the next session. So grab a drink, use the restroom, whatever you need to do, and on to the next one.